So I began the day talking about seeing the world through Dharma eyes. And I pointed out the many other ways that we see the world, through economic eyes, through hormonal eyes, through psychological eyes or emotional eyes, as if that is the template through which we see and understand and relate to the world. And Dharma eyes, seeing the world through Dharma eyes, is really seeing the world through and seeing our life through the way things are, as we come to know it through our own direct experience. And this is important because it's something that we can verify for ourselves. We don't have to read the text and believe it. We don't have to live with the doubt that we don't really know for ourselves. I mean, there are a lot of different areas of authority in our lives. Scientific authority, spiritual authority, political authority, economic authorities. And, we don't know all of that. And we often cannot evaluate what authorities say. But in the realm of our own happiness, no one can tell us, except we ourselves, whether we are free from suffering or not. And so that really is a do-it-yourself job. This coming to know the way it is for me, in my heart, and whether this heart is contracted and in pain, or whether this heart is open and free. And no one can do that for you. And follow the best advice you can get, and no one can tell you how to do it exactly. We have to kind of take the best guidance we can and walk the path for ourselves. And by making innumerable mid-course corrections in how we're practicing and how we're living our life, we can eventually learn to grow in wisdom, which is the ability to live with less and less suffering. But it's not accidental. It's from practicing as we have today to really look deeply at our own experience and to come to know for ourselves, this is the way it is. And to the extent that we can bring our beliefs and our behaviors and our actions in line with the way it is, we stop struggling. We stop trying to make it other than the way it is. We stop blaming others for the way it is. We stop feeling inadequate, disempowered, overwhelmed, and we come into alignment with, this is the way it is. And we can kind of rest in the sure knowledge that we have acquired through our own efforts to observe and to understand the way it is. So I want to talk about the view of life from Dharma eyes. Dharma is really nature. It is the truth. It's the way things are. So when we study Dharma and we come to know the life, know life or know the world through Dharma eyes, we're really studying the nature of being, the nature of being a human being. And it's really the study of natural processes that have resulted in here we are. Here we are in this present moment, feeling, thinking, relating to this world and this life the way we do. How did it happen? Why is it that we suffer? Why is it that we don't suffer sometimes? While we've been through a lot of suffering and non-suffering, we often still don't really understand how it happens and can't kind of predict what's going to happen. And We're just kind of like at the whim of circumstances. We don't have to be. We can really come to a greater knowledge of how to live our lives and how to understand our experience and suffer less. One helpful way of understanding our experience is that everything that occurs in the body and the mind is natural. It's a natural process. It's just the unfolding of nature. There's no mistakes. Things don't happen accidentally. Things happen because of causes and conditions giving rise to their lawful effects. And we experience the lawful effects. We may not understand the causes and the conditions, and so we think, oh, it was an accident. No accident. So Dharma is really the study of nature. So when we practice Dharma, we are becoming scientists of ourselves. Scientists of the unfolding of this process called me. And really studying and looking at how that is happening. When I say that all that occurs in the body and the mind is kind of the unfolding of nature, it's natural, it's a natural process, it's clear that we are, as a human being, we are subject to the biological laws of nature. Right? We're a living organism that has a limited lifespan, that is reliant on food in and waste out, and just like all other biological processes, we are not free of the biological laws that govern living beings or living tissue. We can whinge and whine about it having to be that way, but we can't really liberate ourselves from that. Just as we are also subject to the physical laws of the universe. The physical laws, the chemical laws, the physical laws like the law of gravity. We might like to not have to deal with gravity sometimes, like just feel a little lighter about it all. But you know what? It doesn't do any good to kind of resist the truth of those physical laws. To the extent that we avoid, deny, minimize, or try to dismiss it, we suffer a lot. And so we are heir to the physical and biological laws of nature. Right? There are other laws of nature that we are heir to, that are less well known to Western science. I must say the neuroscientists are making some minor progress in coming to understand them at the instigation of a lot of Buddhist meditators. But nevertheless, there's still not a widespread understanding of the laws of nature that govern the unfolding of the mind. But in the Buddha's understanding of the mind, there are laws governing the unfolding of how the mind is working. And if we observe the mind with as much continuity and as much interest and as much resolve and determination as the other biological and physical laws have been observed, we too, Western science, we say, could make some progress in discerning and articulating the laws of nature that govern the unfolding of the mind. We can see the unfolding of the mind if we pay attention. As we pay attention like we have been today, we can see, when these causes and conditions arise, then this is the experience in the mind. It's not really that obscure, but it does take paying very close attention. One of the laws that governs the unfolding of the mind is the law of karma. Now, most of us have heard of the law of karma. You know, if you speak or act with an unwholesome state of mind, some greed, aversion, a delusion, confusion, then the result is going to in some way be pretty unpleasant. On the other hand, if you act with kindness and generosity and understanding and compassion or love, then the resultant effect of that is going to be some degree of pleasantness, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual pleasantness. Well, we can get a sense of that in our own life if we practice and pay careful attention. We can get a sense. There may be a lot of footnotes to the law of karma that, it's just, dogma to us, really. Hearsay and dogma. We don't need to believe that. We just need to pay attention as if the law of karma, it might be true. And then find out for ourselves. If we can suspend our doubt or our disbelief and investigate, then we'll find out for ourselves. And that is really what the direction of this practice is. See for yourself. The Buddha said the Dharma is ehipassiko. Ehipassiko means come and see for yourself. Don't believe it just because somebody said it. But listen, understand, practice, see for yourself. But once you see for yourself that this is the way it is, then have the courage and the integrity to live in alignment with it, to minimize suffering in your own life. There's another area of law in the mind or in nature, which we come to understand, and it's called the law of the Dharma. And the law of the Dharma includes, like the teachings on the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths, the first one says, suffering happens. Suffering happens. And there isn't any one of us that can deny that law, that isn't subject to, or heir to, or living within the confines of that law. It's true. And when we look carefully, the second noble truth is that suffering is caused by some form of clinging, holding on, desire, being identified with, attachment. Now, it's not always obvious how our suffering is caused by clinging. But if we look carefully, and if we pay attention continuously, we'll begin to discern for ourselves. We'll be able to confirm for ourselves whether it's true or not. I won't tell you that it is or not. I'm just saying, listen to the teachings on the Four Noble Truths. Discover for yourself whether they're true. And in the Four Noble Truths, there's the third Noble Truth says that there is an end to suffering. It's possible to bring suffering to an end. How does that happen? Well, if we pay attention and we see that we're holding on to something that is causing us pain, we can let go. Sometimes we can just intentionally let go. I like to tell the story, it's kind of embarrassing, but I still tell it anyway. My conditioning in going to university was in engineering, and I took a lot of advanced math courses before we had handheld calculators. It was all slide rule and longhand math, and I just did a lot of math courses. And so my mind was very filled with mathematical formulas and solving mathematical equations, and could carry on calculations kind of effortlessly. So years after I graduated from university, I went to my first meditation retreat, and I didn't know what I was getting into, and I was trying to do the best I could. But when my mind wandered away from the meditation object, the breath, it went to doing mathematical calculations. And so I'd be wandering, my mind would be wandering in thought, figuring out these calculations and multiplying 4 and 5 digit numbers, and just kind of zoned out, just doing this mathematics in my mind. And I would come to, and I'd go, do I need to be doing this right now? No. But I didn't know that's what I was doing in my discretionary time until I started practicing awareness and noticed, well, that's how I spend my discretionary time. Let that go. That's one way of just a very simple way that awareness frees us from unnecessary suffering. Because we see how, the mind wanders off and it just gets anxious, it gets fretful, it gets depressed, why? Well, because we don't notice it. But once we notice it, then we can say, I don't need to be doing this. And sometimes we just let go. There are further development of mind, and I don't have time to go into them today, how mindful awareness leads to letting go of even subtler and more difficult, more tenaciously held beliefs, habits of mind, unexamined assumptions that this is the way it is when it really isn't. And these all come into view because of awareness. But until we know that we're holding on, we can't let go. And so, in the awareness practice itself, the study of the way it is, nature, the nature of the unfolding of this life, in the process of that, we will discover suffering and the holding on that's causing that suffering. And when we see that, we can begin to let go. Less suffering. The fourth noble truth, how to do that, is the Eightfold Path. Watch your speech and behavior. That's the first training. Because so much of our suffering, the things in our life that cause us to be upset and frustrated and fearful and anxious and vulnerable, is because we're not very careful in our relationships with others. How we speak, how we act, in relationship to our own body, in relationship to one another. And so if we start paying mindful attention to the intention before speaking and acting, we'll put a lid on a lot of that carelessness. And even if we could, in all of our relationships, keep a really wholesome attitude of mind and not kind of provoke each other to emotional reactivity. Even if we could do that, the mind still, worries and frets and stews and blames, and even though we're not speaking it, we're not acting it out, the mind can still be tortured. So the Buddha offered a second training, which is mindfulness, which reveals the activity of mind. And once we see the activity of mind that's causing suffering, we can let go of it in the moment. Just through mindful awareness. Not getting, like today, whether we're feeling anxious or sleepy or depressed or upset in one form or another, as soon as you become aware of it, you can just notice it, be with it, you can allow it, and you'll see that it doesn't last very long. Phew. You didn't have to nuke it, you didn't have to get rid of it, you didn't have to blame yourself. It goes by itself. Well, this points to the third training of the Noble Eightfold Path, which is insight. And insight is the ability to see deeply into the nature of things and to really examine some assumptions we have about the nature of reality. Now, if I told you that things change, it shouldn't come as a surprise. I mean, we all know that. We all know that, but we don't live with that reality on a moment-to-moment basis. We structure our lives to build in as much security and as much unchanging reality as we can get in our relationships, in our finances, in our government, in our institutions, in our home life. We build in routine, fixity, because we rely on things not changing, things being predictable for our happiness. Is that wise? We still do it. We know that things change. Relationships change, governments change, the economy changes, jobs change, our emotions change, our health changes. Everything is changing all the time. And yet, that level of insecurity, that level of changeability is just untenable to live with ordinarily. It's just untenable. We just can't handle that level of instability. And so we try to fix it in our mind. But actually, things are changing just that rapidly, all the time. And so that assumption that we can kind of slow down the change process, or slow down and make things kind of permanent and fixed and solid and steady and stable and reliable and predictable, it's an unexamined assumption in our lives. Awareness practice will bring this fact to light in so many ways that things are just not that reliable. They're changeable. And in the process of gradually coming to know that, we can learn to live with that degree of change, that degree of instability, that degree of unpredictability. And that's that knowledge and the ability to live with that knowledge on a moment-to-moment basis is a much more reliable and realistic understanding of the way things are than our unexamined assumption that we can make things solid. Right? Another unexamined assumption is that we somehow, in spite of all of the pain that we've experienced in our life, we somehow think that it's a mistake. That if we could just get it right, somehow there would be no more pain. That we could somehow kind of skip it, kind of get around it, or be free of that kind of pain and insecurity and vulnerability and those unpleasant emotions and existential crises. But actually the Buddha said, not possible. Not possible. But if we resist that knowledge, we suffer. If we see for ourselves, oh, this is the way it is, and learn to live in alignment with, oh, this is the way it is, then we stop struggling. We stop frustrating ourselves. We stop getting disappointed. We stop having unrealistic expectations about ourselves and the nature of life. And we live in alignment with, well, this is normal. Can you imagine how your life would be different if you no longer feared pain? If you don't fear pain, what's the fear? I mean, don't fear physical pain, don't fear emotional pain, don't fear, interpersonal pain, whatever it is. You don't fear it. But we do. We're scared to death. We try to live our life as if we could somehow avoid it. We cannot. But when we understand that, and it's the understanding of this kind of pain and the inevitability of it that frees us from resisting it. Then we have courage, we have the ability to be with anything that arises and not kind of wigged out by pain and not living our life trying to avoid it or being afraid of it. This is very liberating. And it is possible. And that's the direction that our awareness training, of just what we've been doing here today, just seeing things as they are, moment to moment. Eventually all this comes into view, and we can learn to disentangle ourselves from relying on fear or getting caught in fear. And we can learn to look at these unexamined assumptions and disentangle our beliefs from them. It will happen. If you put yourself on this path of practice, it will happen. It'll unfold quite naturally. You don't have to know you don't have to know what's coming. You just keep practicing, it'll all happen. It's been observed in hundreds of thousands, millions of meditators, that this is the path of the unfolding of mind, the unfolding of wisdom. It's not like some people have the ability and some don't. Everyone has the potential. Everyone has the potential. It does take effort. It does take perseverance. It does take a very sincere and sustained interest in freeing the mind. When the Buddha was asked, why is it that some people are really, kind of dull, and some people are really wise, they really make wise decisions in their life? He said, those who are wise because they've asked a lot of questions. Not they've asked questions of someone else. They've asked questions of themselves and looked within themselves to find the answer. And that's what this practice is. Just ask yourself, why do I suffer? And don't go read the book. They don't have the answer. The answer is in your own experience and how you understand it. What do you have to know about yourself and your beliefs and your assumptions to free yourself from this suffering? You can do it. You can do it. Awareness and wisdom will unfold quite naturally if you make the effort. All Dharma practices, generosity, living in harmony with one another according to the precepts, practicing mindfulness in order to get a handle on the obstructions, practicing insight, practicing loving kindness, practicing compassion, practicing any of the Dharma practices that you have, many of you have been exposed to all kinds of Dharma practices. Gratitude practice, all of them. What do they actually do? They cultivate wholesome states of mind to overcome or oppose or to minimize unwholesome states of mind. That's the direction. All Dharma practices cultivate wholesome states of mind. It doesn't matter which one you're doing. Do any of them. Do all of them. Take every opportunity. Because it doesn't go to waste. You might spend a whole lifetime just doing loving kindness practice. That's okay. Fine. You might spend a whole lifetime just doing generosity practice. That's okay. Fine. We have a lot of room for development, a lot of room for improvement, we could say. We don't have to feel bad about not getting it all done this week. Okay. So that's generally how we want to understand the Dharma and the laws of nature and the work that we're doing here with awareness in relation to or in regard to the laws of nature. Now, in meditation practice, what is actually going on? I use the three-dimensional teaching. In every moment, an object arises. An object is a sense impression. A sight, a sound, a smell, a taste, a touch, or a conceptual object created by thought. In every moment, something is arising. Conditions come together, giving rise to an object. The mind arises at the same time as that object to know it. The mind knows the object. Now, this is happening to all of us, to all beings, all the time. Even dogs, cats, ants, everything. Humans. Experience happens, meaning conditions come together, giving rise to an object, and it's being known at some level, being known. But not everyone is practicing awareness and knows that that's what's going on. There's one sutra that the Buddha gave, it's called the Short Sutra, I think, or something like that, where he said, all that you've ever experienced is just 6 things: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking. That's it. Can you think of anything that you've ever experienced that's not one of those? That's all we've ever experienced. You'd think it'd be easy. We're only experiencing 6 things. Be mindful of it. It's not. Because we have all kinds of ideas. We get confused by what we see, smell, taste, touch, think. Awareness practice is monitoring, learning to recognize what is being known in each moment, being aware of it, and understanding that this is the process that's happening, and being able to kind of have we call it a balanced relationship through understanding it. In meditation practice, the field of our attention is primarily our own body and our own mind. Primarily. It's what's going on in our body, what do we feel directly, and what's going on in our mind, what do we see and feel directly, tangibly, immediately, moment to moment. There are times when we really look outside of ourselves, listen outside of ourselves, and notice those objects too. But primarily, it's learning to be with the inner experiences, what's going on within our own orbit of experience. It's not a matter of belief. While there is a lot of teachings of the Buddha which sound like dogma, you must believe this, 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 and this, it's better to think of it as, well, maybe. And find out for yourself, is this the way it is? Because belief, or believing what you read in Dharma books or what the Buddha said, believing it is not going to free the mind from attachment, identification, confusion. So it's better to kind of hold things lightly and look to your experience. And if your experience confirms what you've read, fine. If it doesn't, keep practicing until you know for yourself the way it is. Now, when I talk about objects of meditation, the object that arises to be known, objects can be anything. Sight, sound, smells, taste, touch. Concepts, perceptions, beliefs, assumptions, emotions, sensations in the body, sensations in the mind. We were talking earlier about how sometimes you go to a very spiritual place and you feel something. It's an object. It's an object, no matter how subtle or how gross. It can be very gross objects, physical, tangible, objects, or it can be the subtlest states of mind possible. Just the joy, bliss, equanimity that I talked about, or even infinite spaciousness, infinite consciousness, neither perception nor non-perception, all those things are objects. They're just something that's come to be through causes and conditions, being known. That's it. They may be very subtle, very seductive, very pleasant, or they may be very gross, very painful, very get rid of it. But nevertheless, it's just an object being known. So in every moment, there's objects and there's awareness. Objects and awareness. Objects and awareness. The objects, as I mentioned, are going to change forever. They're going to keep arising and changing over and over and over and over again. Of these two, the object and the awareness is more important. The objects will come and go. Some will be pleasant, some will be unpleasant, some will be gross, some will be subtle, some are physical, some are mental, some are emotional, some are whatever. Be careful about getting fascinated with the object of your experience. Instead, pay very close attention to the awareness, because in the awareness, there's either wisdom or delusion. And with wisdom, we can free ourselves from suffering. And with delusion, we suffer more. It's not in the object. The suffering is not in the object. Yeah, there are painful objects, and they're suffering, of course. But there are pleasant objects, and we think, oh, there's no suffering. But if we don't notice the attachment in the awareness, there's suffering. So of these two, objects and awareness is more important. Now, awareness is not this global, kind of ever-present ether in the surrounding us all. It's not this kind of universal something that we all just kind of tap into. It too arises momentarily due to causes and conditions. Each moment is a new moment of awareness. A new moment of awareness. A new moment of awareness. Do you know what the causes and conditions for the arising of awareness are? Well, most of us haven't looked that carefully. And we can sometimes fall into a mistaken belief that, Awareness is just there all the time. I'm just aware all the time, but sometimes I'm not aware of it. I mean, kind of like, I mean, we do say stuff like that, It's like awareness is always there, but sometimes it's obscured by, the clouds in the mind, or the obstructions in the mind. Is that is that an accurate understanding? Or is awareness not really there? How are we going to know? Well, we're going to know because we pay attention, and we come to understand what are the causes and conditions that give rise to awareness itself. Even as you practice today, you begin in the first sitting, and it's like, wow, the mind is all over the shop, it's wandering around, it's just kind of confused, you just got up an hour ago or 2 hours ago. But if you keep practicing for an hour, and take a break, or walk around, practice another hour, practice another hour, practice another hour, by the end of the day, you can see you have more awareness than you did in the morning. Why? How does it happen? There's greater recognition of awareness later in the day or at the end of a period of practice than before. Well, because we've been cultivating the conditions, some of the causes and conditions that give rise to greater awareness. Now, just extrapolate that every day for the rest of your life. Imagine you're doing this kind of awareness practice for the rest of your life. That'd be a lot of awareness, wouldn't it? It'd be a lot of understanding. It'd be a lot of, really very refined knowledge of the way the mind works, because we're paying attention to it. Well, most of us don't have that kind of time. We're too busy doing other things. But to the extent that we do pay attention and do cultivate awareness, do what we can to give rise to awareness, there will be this increasing knowledge of the nature of the mind, the nature of awareness, the nature of suffering, and the nature of the end of suffering. It should be clear that meditation is the work of the mind. It's not what the body's doing. It's the work of the mind. And anything we do with the mind to understand the mind, to observe the mind, to cultivate the mind, to strengthen the mind, to be more aware, anything we do is actually meditation. So meditation is not just sitting with crossed legs and holding your hands this way with your eyes closed, paying attention to breath. That's not, that can be meditation, but that's not the only form of meditation. Even if you just reflect carefully on now what's going on here, and you're using your mind to really understand the mind, that's meditation. Sometimes even reading what you read that inspires your mind or informs your mind to practice in a certain way, or to look at awareness in this way, that also is meditation. Talking with other people, sometimes some of the dialogue we've had today might have been helpful for you in understanding the mind. Oh, that's meditation, because you're working with the mind. You're working with the qualities of the mind, the understanding of the mind, and coming to know the mind with more accurately. That's meditation. Even that kind of dialogue, that kind of discussion. And so too reading can also be. But primarily, it's through close observation of the mental activity, primarily. Why do we observe our experience? We observe our experience in order to know things the way they are. And we know, when we know the way things are, as I said, we can choose to live in alignment with them. And when we do, we'll minimize or eliminate unnecessary suffering. It sometimes is hard to believe that just observing the way things are can be liberating. But let me try to show you how that's possible. I teach up at Cloud Mountain Retreat Center up in southern Washington every year. And it's a beautiful little 5-acre chunk of forest. very simple center, very rustic, but not, very it's comfortable. It's in the forest, and there's a lot of deer around there. And they know it's a sanctuary, and come hunting season, there's a lot of deer. They kind of come, they come to hang out there, because there's no hunting there. And oftentimes, there's dozens of times, I'll be giving a Dharma talk, I look out the back window, and there's deer out there listening. Well, I like to believe they're listening. I don't really know. But if I was to ask you, what's a deer like? Well, what is it that deer do? What's the nature of a deer? Or how are they? Well, you could go Google it, nature of deer, and you'd come up with all kinds of knowledge that other people have, gathered about the nature of deer. Or you could just go to Cloud Mountain Retreat Center and watch for a day. Just watch. If you just watch a deer, how it moves through the forest, how it wiggles its ear and shakes its tail, and when it eats and when it doesn't, and what it eats and what it doesn't, and just how it takes care of its young and keeps an eye on things, and how it jumps and what startles it. If you just watch, you just observe that deer. At the end of a day, or at the end of several hours, you would have a lot of knowledge about the nature of deer, how deer are. Right? Nobody told you it. You didn't even have to think about it. You don't have to think about what they're doing. You just watch. You just watch and you'll see. You'll gather that information, you'll gather that knowledge just from observation. And when you have enough observation, enough knowledge, your mind begins to put it into kind of facts and kind of understanding. Really? And to know, this is the way deer are. And you don't have to think about it. You don't have to try to figure it out. It all happens because you're observing carefully with an open mind to understand. That's all. Just trying to understand. The same thing happens when you observe your own mind. You don't have to figure it out. You don't have to think about it. You just have to observe what is going on in the mind, moment to moment. You just observe. You just track. This leads to this, conditions that, and this is what happens, this is what it feels like, and when that happens, this is how I react, and when I react like this is what the body feels like, this is what the mind feels like, it lasts this long, these are the kind of thoughts that arise due to this kind of mental state, and you can see the body and the mind talking to each other all the time. The body experience conditions the mind conditions the body conditions the body, the mind conditions the mind. All of that is revealed from just paying attention. Just pay attention. You don't have to go read the book to find out what you're supposed to be knowing. You don't have to listen to any tapes. I mean, they can be inspiring, they can be informing, they can be encouraging, but ultimately we got to do the work ourselves. And we just cannot kind of inhale, imbibe, or kind of get an infusion of someone else's wisdom. Knowledge, yes. Wisdom, no. Wisdom comes from within. And so it's through our own observation, guided by others' experiences, of course, that leads to this knowledge, this very intimate understanding of this is the way it is for me. This is how I suffer. This is how I don't suffer. And then you begin to see the impersonal nature of it all. It's like things just happen. Even this development of wisdom, even the arising of wisdom, the unfolding of wisdom from observation, it happens in a very impersonal way. You don't make it happen. We observe, and if we observe carefully, it will happen. You can't stop it from happening. It'll just happen by itself. This is the nature. This is the nature of the unfolding of the mind. If you make this kind of effort, wisdom will unfold. Guaranteed. Don't take it from me. Just look into your own life. Look into your own experience. You'll see for yourself. Oh, that's right. This is how it happens. Actually, the obstructions that we identified this morning, sleepiness and reactivity of one sort or another, getting caught in desire and attachment and planning, or avoiding, and anxiety, and the things that we talked about. Those obstructions, they arise in the mind. The Buddha said, the mind, the mind is, by nature, is radiant and pure. It is because of visiting forces known as defilements or obstructions that we suffer. All of the suffering that you've ever experienced in your life is due to an arising state of mind, an obstruction that has arisen in the mind. Some fear, anxiety, aversion, desire, confusion, delusion of one sort or another has caused all of the suffering that we've experienced. But, as I mentioned before, no matter how much they have arisen in the past and how much they've caused you to suffer, it hasn't inherently affected the ability of the mind to know the next moment unobstructedly. Right? It's just like the mind has not been damaged by any of the unpleasantness that you've experienced, and neither has it been improved by all the pleasantness that you've experienced. The mind just keeps doing its thing, quite naturally. Why not get on that boat? Right? It's just like, let the mind do its thing. Don't obstruct it. Don't unintentionally obstruct it. And when it does get obstructed, look for the causes and the conditions of that obstruction and work to understand. Once we understand, if we approach our experience with the curiosity to understand the obstructions, how they arise, we'll see. Obstructions arise because we're not paying careful attention. Or we have mistaken beliefs about. Sometimes we think, oh, when I get angry, I should be angry. There's suffering in the world, and I should be angry at the perpetrators of that suffering. Well, that's kind of going to be hard to be free of suffering with that understanding. So, okay, how do we understand suffering? Well, we look at our own mind, and we see where the obstructions, where fear comes from, where aversion comes from, where that judgment comes from, where that depression comes from. And we can understand. Not because we get rid of it, just because we observe. Just like deer. You want to understand depression? Pay attention to it. And you can. No matter what kind of pharmaceutical drugs you're taking, you can still pay attention. As we come to understand the way things are in our body, in our mind, and how they relate to one another, and what gives rise to suffering, or the obstructions that cause suffering, as we begin to understand this, we begin to free the mind from habits, unskillful habits, and wrong belief. And this is inevitable, and it's the direction of practice, really. We come to see the way things are, truly. And this is seeing the world through Dharma eyes. And as we see the world through Dharma eyes, we see our life through the lens of the truth and the way things are. Then we stop suffering. It's possible. It's possible for any one of us, all of us. If you're interested, if you're curious, if you make the effort, and you're persistent, we can disentangle our sense of self from all of the causes and the sources of suffering. And when we do, what's left? Well, happiness, ease, contentment, peace. Not because we go searching for peace, we go searching for understanding. And the result of that understanding, when applied in our life, is peace. There isn't any one of us that can't walk this path. It's available to all of us. You're not too old. You're not the wrong gender. You haven't had the wrong experiences. You haven't been damaged irretrievably. Not possible. Not possible. If the mind is there, you can work with it. Think about that. It's possible to free the mind from suffering. From anxiety, from depression, from fear, from loneliness, from stress. It's possible. And then ask yourself, what else is more worth doing in life? Because let's face it, we have a lot of distractions. We have a lot of activities that aren't headed in that direction. Right? Only we can make that choice for ourselves. Only we. And let's be realistic. We can make a choice and we progress for a while, we backslide for a while, and we get re-inspired and we progress for a while, and practice. It's like that. It's like that. It's not a straight line shot from here to liberation. It's kind of a circular, up and down. It takes a while to learn, but it's inevitable also. If you practice, you'll understand more. And the more you understand, the freer the heart will become. So, I'll see you on the path. It's nice to have companions on the path. Because without companions, man, it's a lonely, long haul. It's a slog. And so it's always good to have companions to kind of share, the stories of our trials and our tribulations, and our successes, and our confusions. Because, yeah, it happened. That's all we're doing. That's all any of the teachers are doing, is just sharing their own stories, their own experiences of, this is what I've seen, just to kind of remind you of the journey we're on together, to disentangle and free the heart. Thank you for listening.